Jesus was praying. Maybe Jesus was praying that song right there. That song right there. Jesus was praying in private, and his disciples were with him, and he asked them, "Who do the crowds say I am?" And they said, some say John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and still others that one of the prophets of long ago has come back to life. "But what about you?" Jesus asked. "Who do you say I am?" And Peter responded, "God's Messiah." Now, y'all know how I feel about Peter. Peter. That rock upon which the church was planted time after time gets it kind of wrong. But this time, Peter got it right. The liberator, Messiah, is the liberator. The one who has not been before. The one who is beloved by God and who is becoming. He is not a prophet of long ago. The messages of the past being lived out in the present. No, he is an anointed king, they say. The one who rules not from the creeds and the rules of the past. The one who came to meet us where we are in the moment, in our passion, in our desire, in our betrayal, in our suffering. People will say all sorts of things about who we are and what we believe based on the trail of data that we have left behind. I have been preaching all morning on big data. Our purchaser of my sermon sits over here. The influencer. You see, data is everywhere. Individual bits of information pour from every moment of our daily life. The internet, credit card usage, cell phone tracking, traffic patterns, buildings and trains, buses and boats, planes and bridges, companies and factories. Everything is emitting data. How do we handle it all? According to Harvard Magazine, the data flow is so fast that the total accumulation of all the data in the past 2 years is what they call a zettabyte. It dwarfs the prior record of all the data of human civilization. The past 2 years' worth of data is more data than all of the data in human civilization combined. Jesus says, "Who do the crowds say I am?" The amount of data is incredible, but it's not the amount that is revolutionary. It's not even the exponential growth of storage capacity or computational capacity. The revolution actually lies in our newfound ways of connecting and experiencing the data. There's an entirely new profession actually grounded in creating these visual models from data sets that allow people to see patterns in ways that were simply just not possible less than a year ago. And all of these new ways of seeing data are generating new insights. You see, knowledge is power, but the data alone is not powerful. It's the meaning or the linkages of that data that is powerful. And when someone gives you data that you don't want, give it back. Give it back to them. What were the lyrics of that song? What did you just say? When with God before me, what's the other part? He's more than the world against me. He's more than the world against me, right? Pay attention to which data you give value to. So it's not just the size of your data that matters. Wait for it. It's what you do with the data that matters. No matter how much data is gathered, you still have to ask the right questions. You have to ask the right questions. In my own prayer life this week, I was gifted with this little gem. Judgment places us over another person, but discernment places us as equals before God. Judgment places us over another person, but discernment places us as equals before God. Judgment about who someone else is always rooted in the past. Discernment is about holding them as children of God and meeting them as equals in that very moment. Who do you say I am? The one who has not been before, the one who is beloved by God and who is becoming. Jesus' answer was not about being stuck in the past. But we can be confused by the ways that people link data together. Very easily manipulated data is. See, there's a difference between probability and prediction. There's a difference between correlation and causation. And see, human beings can't predict the future. No amount of data will make that possible. You see, one of my favorite books where science meets culture and philosophy is a little book called The Universe and the Teacup. And in it, mathematician and author Casey Cole says, the idea that science possesses a crystal ball that can look accurately into the future is as old as science itself. It's a myth that suggests that prediction is merely a matter of accumulating enough information. It's the belief that the future is already locked into the present by events in the past, and all you need to figure it out is the missing information. But you and I all know that things were pointing in a particular direction, but God. Right? All signs pointing this way, but God. Right? As Cole suggests, prediction is neither the goal nor the forte of science. Truth be told, physicists can't even predict accurately where a ping pong ball will bounce on the other side of a table. We can predict the patterns of a lunar eclipse, but we can't even predict the weather. Now, there's some confusion, unfortunately, about what a theory is. A theory is not a fact. Theories are not about predicting the future. Theories, if you think about it, are really about predicting the present. See, chemists, for example, can predict what will happen if you take certain elements and bring them together under certain conditions. But the thing is it tells you what's going to happen in that moment, not about what's going to happen next week. It's about what is and not about what will be. Physicist Frank Oppenheimer wrote, "Prediction is dependent entirely on a single assumption, that observed patterns will be repeated." Because of the patterns in our everyday lives, we can be fooled into believing that we actually know more than we really do. Predictions should only serve as guideposts, not goalposts. So based on my lived experience, I can predict a number of things. The sun will come up tomorrow until it doesn't. My daughter will inevitably tell me that she is not tired at the very moment when she is at her sleepiest. My knee will ache when the barometric pressure drops. My heart will likely be broken again. At least I hope so, because it means that I am living open to the world. Based on my experience of humanity, another truth is likely that I am only temporarily abled. Based on my experience of the holy in my life, no matter what happens in my life, I will be given the strength to make it through because I know I am never alone. And that I don't have to bear anything on my shoulders by myself. Now, these are merely, though, just patterns of my experience. And I don't know about you, but in all matters concerning people in the world, I am best served in my meaning making when I hold the patterns of the past loosely. Just because I have always done something does not mean that I have to make that choice again. Just because your spouse or your child or your boss or your parent has always done it that way does not mean that that's how they will always behave. In fact, you're anticipating that behavior, especially when it's negative, may in fact encourage that behavior to repeat itself. Depending on patterns of the past does not account for or create space for creativity or maturity or generativity or shifting presence. You see, when we think we know it all, there is no room for God. When we believe we know it all, we are standing in the shoes of God. I have been brought to my knees on multiple occasions thinking I knew better. That's just me, right? Right, that's just me. That's why I stand up here. We would be better served being open to experience the moment that we're actually in, the one that is actually unfolding right now, instead of making up a bunch of drama that's coming from behind us all the way into this present moment, wrapped up in that. See, I have a thinking problem. Do y'all have a thinking problem? I have a thinking problem. And see, if I don't turn over that thinking to something bigger than me, I get wrapped up in drama so bad that I can make up stories. I can make up some stories. But do you want to be and only be who you've always been? Who would want that? See, your commitments are covenantal. Covenantal, not creedal in this faith, so that we can have room to grow. God wants your life to continue to unfold in this life, not to get stuck in one place. And so you can make your commitments and then unfold within them. Now let me go back for just a minute to that often made mistake of what I mentioned. Correlation is not causation. You see, correlation does not in fact equal causation. Two events can consistently correlate with each other, can consistently show up together, but not have any causal relationship. Here's a good example. The relationship between reading ability and shoe size. All right? If someone performed a survey, they would discover that the larger shoe sizes correlate with better reading ability, right? But that does not mean that large feet cause good reading. Instead, it's caused by the fact that young children have small feet and have not yet or only recently been taught to read, right? So in this case, the two variables are more accurately correlated with a third variable, which is age, right? So do not be fooled by the linkage of data. Just because things appear together in the world does not mean that one causes the other. Where big data has been extremely effective, though, at prediction has been in marketing. Predicting future purchases based on previous purchasing history. The Amazon recommendations engine is just one example of this. And you see, we have similar algorithms that have effectively learned to play chess. They can predict the outcome of a Supreme Court case even better than human beings. Credit card companies have been using big data to predict risk of default of payment, which, by the way, evidently those people who buy anti-scuff pads for their furniture are more likely to make their payments than those who don't. So in the public realm, big data has been used to predict where and when all kinds of things will happen, like when crimes are most likely to occur, and in finding associations between air quality or water quality and health. And I am all for science. You need to know that. I think that all of these things can live in conjunction together. And I'm kind of a bit of an information junkie, actually, because, see, I want to know it all before I make my choice. I want to know as much as I can before I make my choice. But there are a few problems with big data that I wish everyone were aware of. So I'm going to talk a minute about those problems. Problem number one, people. People have motivations. Power is knowledge and influence, so what do you do with the data depends on your goal. And your goals depend on what you want. And what you want depends on your ego. And your ego in check depends on whether or not you're talking to something higher than yourself. Or if you've got a group of people who are holding you accountable. And your goals can even determine what you see, which is why we need to know our values and our goals at the core of everything that we do. And sometimes that requires an outside check, right? On a personal level, I pray to God that my thoughts are directed away from selfishness and dishonesty and fear. But when I do not even trust my own motivations, tell me you've been there. I seek counsel of someone, a minister, a coach, a sponsor, a therapist, a disinterested party, right, to help me. One skeptical big data industry insider, Anthony Nystrom, who started a software company, told The New Yorker, selling big data is a great gig for charlatans because they never have to admit being wrong. If their system fails to provide predictive insight, it's not their models, it's an issue with the data. You didn't have enough data. There was too much noise. You measured the wrong things. But in reality, models of most things have historically speaking been wrong. Models are not the actual thing in itself, right? They're incomplete. They're effective only in some circumstances and not all. So when big data is in the hands of those in power, even with what seems like a good goal in mind, we can still run into trouble. The Chicago Police Department has ramped up the use of its predictive analysis system based on big data to identify people it believes are likely to commit crimes. These people, who are then placed on a heat list, are visited by police officers who tell them that they are considered pre-criminals by the Chicago Police Department. Pre-criminals. And are warned that if they do in fact commit any crimes, they are likely to be caught. The Chicago PD defends their practice. The technical champion of this procedure, Miles Wernick from the Illinois Institute of Technology, says it's a neutral, data-driven system for preventing crime in a city that has struggled with street violence and other forms of crime. Neutral. Wernick's approach involves seeking through the data for abnormal patterns that correlate with crime, like driving while black and what else? Oh, wait, living on the wrong side of town. He compares it with approaches to predicting disease outbreaks, stating that people whose social networks have violence in them are also likely to commit violence. So this is one of those things like the reading and the feet size. Although these things may be correlative, it's not predictive. And whenever the power is only in the hands of some, it is likely to even be prescriptive. Where you're looking for arrests, you will find them. We see this in Tulsa, right? It's a chicken and an egg issue. Are there more crimes in North Tulsa, which is why we need more police officers placed there? Or are there more police officers there and so there are more crimes reported? This Chicago PD procedure is a serious problem, not only because they are not transparent about what data they are using, they won't tell anyone, but the entire assumption that you are guilty by association of the people that your friends, who you hang out with, is in fact unconstitutional, i.e. Amendment number 1. And for good reason it's unconstitutional. It reminds me a bit of what's going on in Uganda. You know, if right now, with regards to the LGBT community, if you know about illegal homosexual activity, you are to report it, and if you don't, that's also a crime. Now, we know, because of some transparent and rigorous independent scholarship across this country and over time, that police intervention is not, in fact, neutral in Chicago or elsewhere. From searches to arrests, prosecution to sentencing laws, current crime data is embedded in a wider culture in which human beings with social power can and do make subjective decisions about individual acts. So being prescriptive based on bad data is just perpetuating an already established problem at the expense of the rights of our citizens. Problem number 2, people. People have limited access to the theory. So we're not a country or a planet of equal access to education right now, nor have we ever been. And so the data and the capacity to understand that data lies in the hands of the few, those who can afford it, use it, and understand it. Now, currently, there are not enough people comfortable dealing with petabytes of data, whatever that is. I can't even conceive of what a petabyte is. I suspect that big data analysis, though, in the future is going to become foundational study material for all undergraduates in nearly every discipline in the coming years. It's going to become as basic and probably as misunderstood and as manipulated as statistics already are today. But we need people who understand big data who are not driven by consumerism, to be able to have the checks and the balances of the results. Big data has incredible implications for helping us find new solutions to long-standing problems, but big data is not everything. What is everything? God is everything. Everything. It's so interesting. And so, how will this shape our future? It's frightening and exciting to me to think about our 3-year-old daughter who will only know a world where big data analysis has existed. She will always be marketed to in this way, likely. How will that shape how she views herself and her definition of what she wants and what she needs? Carol Caldwater of The Observer wrote, "Google will know the answer to your question before you have asked it. Based on every email you've ever written, every document, every idle thought you ever typed into a search engine box. It will likely know you better than your intimate partner does. It definitely knows how to order presents because like things pop up and I'm like, ooh." Better perhaps than even you know yourself. Amazon predicts that it's going to be able to know what you want to buy before you actually know you want to buy it, and then it will ship it to your doorstep before you order it via drone. For real. Knowing who Google or Facebook thinks you are will in fact influence who you think you are. I mean, it would kind of be cool if they delivered before I even knew that I wanted it, something to my doorstep, and I went, ooh, this is cool, I think I'll buy this. It's kind of neat. This is exactly the concept of the future espoused by big data, a speculative form of personal identity that might even be ethically questionable. How does this redefine the sense of the individual? Who is the individual if they know before I do what I want? Right? What does it mean about free will and our autonomy that we're striving to realize? What does it mean for a massive network to know what you want and you need better than yourself? Until education catches up, this power lies in the hands of the few. Problem number 3. People. Safeguarding the data and privacy implications. You know, it used to be that you are what you do or where you went to church, right? Where you went to school, what you do for a living. Today you are all of those things, but you are also what you like. And by like, I mean on Facebook. You are your responses to the quizzes you take. You know, you're just giving away free information on the internet about who you are. The groups you join, your posts and your searches. But just because I'm curious about something does not mean I believe it. I don't want to know who Google thinks I am based on my searches because I have looked up some pretty crazy stuff in my lifetime. We are all way more complicated than our searches or our actions, our likes infer, right? Take my volunteering at the abortion clinic. So I volunteer at the abortion clinic and I organize other ministers to do the same to be able to keep a religious voice on the clinic side of the street. But just because I volunteer, it doesn't mean that I would have one. It doesn't mean that I would recommend even that you have one if you came to me. People are way more complicated than just looking at their actions. People are walking contradictions, and so getting to the core of the principle of the matter takes more than just a glimpse about what I like or who I associate with or how I spend my time. But the question is, who benefits from all of this information? In some sense, we do. The user does, to see how we are being seen, so that we might shift our actions into ways that we'd like to be seen. But it's the access to our data that sells us stuff we want. If Target can predict that we're pregnant based on previous purchases, which it can, then what will insurance companies do with this information? What could they glean from the internet? They would know that my dad had kidney cancer, for example. What does that mean about me? What about the government? What does the government do with our information? Knowing who I've called on the telephone is one level of privacy, invaded. Knowing what I've typed in a search engine is another. Reading my emails, even another. So it's important for us to pay attention because data is power and it is money. There are plenty of companies, though, who will not release their consumer data. There are plenty of institutions who try to guard it. And so we have a current clash of data hoarders and privacy issues. So it's important. The problem with big data is not big data. It's people, and more people. Problem number 4, and the final problem that I'll talk to you about this morning, is also grounded in people. You see, people do not typically take risks on hard data. So if you're trying to predict my behavior solely based on hard data, you will likely be wrong. I don't know about you, but most of the big risks that I've taken in my life would not have been probable or predictable merely by analyzing the data in my life up to that point. Right? We're on a trajectory, but God. You're on a trajectory, but God. Right? Things happen that do not make a whole lot of sense. Ron Baker, founder of the VeraSage Institute, wrote that it's simply impossible to know how to do something until you actually attempt it. There are some things that we just do to see how it's going to work out. We didn't have a whole lot of thought behind it in the first place. And that only can be understood in hindsight. So looking backwards through time, there might be a narrative that can be told, but in the moment of decision making, our discernment is so personal. There's that word again, discernment. The difference between judgment and discernment. Discernment puts us as equals before God. It means that I get to determine what the value is of the information that I'm deciding on before I make a decision. And so in the data world, what is relevant or what is interesting is only what is actionable. Soft data, or the data that cannot be measured and defined with specificity, has probably had more of an impact on major decisions in my life than hard data. Nathan Eagle writes, "The mathematization of subjectivity will founder upon the resplendent fact that we are ambiguous beings. We are ambiguous beings. We frequently have mixed feelings and are divided against ourselves. We use different words to communicate similar thoughts, but those words are not even synonyms. Though we dream of exactitude and transparency, our meanings are often approximate and obscure, even to us. We are also self-interpreting beings. That is, we deceive ourselves and each other. We even lie. Now, it's true that we make choices and we translate our feelings into actions, but a choice is often a coarse and inadequate translation of feeling, and a full picture of our inner states cannot always be inferred simply by watching action. This reminds me of a story that had a pretty significant impact on how I view the interplay of soft and hard data. It's about one of Oliver Sacks' patients in a pretty famous book called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. Sacks was working with a man who had incurred a brain injury, and he damaged a very specific area of the brain, the emotional center of his brain, and all of the predictions said that he would be extraordinarily reasonable, kind of a Spock character of sorts, more reasonable than the average person who it was believed was burdened with emotion. But the truth is that this patient was incapable of making a decision. because the patient had no personal preference. So in attempting to make a doctor's appointment, Tuesday was always just as good as Wednesday or Thursday or Friday because he could find just as many pros and cons for each day, and he had no emotional preference. So he couldn't weight the data enough to be able to even make a decision. He didn't have anything to assist him in making up his mind. And so value, completely neutral, simply created a standstill. So how do we make decisions? It's a mess, a hot mess. So in essence, the problem with big data is people. It's how it's used, and the solution is, in fact, people as well. In this magazine called The New Republic, Leon Westeller wrote, "The Amazon or Rotten Tomatoes view of life is that datafication represents an essential enrichment in human marketing. But marketing is hardly the supreme or most consequential human activity. You may be able to predict what I'm going to buy, but that's maybe about where it stops. The religion of information is just another superstition," he says, "another distorting totalism, another, I'll say, putting something in the place of God. Another," he says, "counterfeit deliverance." Counterfeit deliverance. In some ways, the technology is transforming us into brilliant fools in which we presume to believe that eventually we will know everything, in which hope and longing will come to seem obsolete and merely ignorant. But in the process, we are renouncing some of the most valuable and primary human experiences. And so let us testify to the value of the human experience, to revelation and emotion, to the capacity to have soft and hard data in our lives. Have you Googled yourself lately? When you Google me, you will find that I am a minister and a mother, a wife, divorced, a singer, a songwriter, an author, a columnist, a consultant, an executive coach, a trainer, a teacher, a volunteer at the abortion clinic, a triathlete, which, by the way, nothing says that I'm ever going to do that again. You can find my family tree dating back to the 1700s, and actually, I even did a DNA swab that's attached to that. If you're trying to figure out my theology, good luck. You'll be seriously confused because there are sermons on atheism, there are sermons on, next week I'm talking on humanism, and then today's got a lot of God talk in it. But you can track all of them and maybe extrapolate what interested me for the moment. If you get on my Facebook, you'll find a lot about what I like. You can friend me on Spotify and see what kind of music I listen to. But none of this really tells you who I am or what I believe. And neither does it about you. What I prefer or how I weigh my values doesn't say anything about that. It's simply information to add to the mix. There are 1,000 assumptions to make about me with each one of those bits of data, but it doesn't tell you what I value the most. What I can tell you is that even in light of a letter that you may have received in the mail, the soft data that is guiding me very clearly is that my heart has been and always will belong to this church, and that my ministry will continue to be here no matter how it is redefined, as long as that ministry serves you and God well. Amen.